So, former President Jacob Zuma has been expelled by the ANC's National Disciplinary Committee. How did we get here, you ask? I need you to go back in time just a little bit, not too far. Go back to December 16th, 2023, when we were in Soweto. Former President Jacob Zuma making a public announcement that while he'll die ANC, he could no longer lobby, i.e., campaign for the ANC. He could no longer vote for the ANC. He also called on members of the public, the electorate at least, to not put its faith in the ANC, saying, please help us get the ANC under 50% when the country eventually goes to vote. He then said he'll back a little known party at the time, the Umkhonto Wesizwe Party. At the time, we're told the leader of that party is Jabulani Khumalo. You've seen what's unfolded, of course, between the former president and Jabulani Khumalo. You've also then had the elections where you've seen the MK party emerging as the third largest political party in the country, being really, for me, the story of the elections. The other story of the elections in 2024 is seeing an ANC after 30 years of power going under and relying on coalition governments in order to remain in power. And somewhere in the middle of all of those shifting sands and movements, those puzzle pieces, lies the answer as to why we got here. It's also where the ANC's NDC features. So in the middle of all of this, you've got an ANC that is not sure how to receive the news of its former president, who served 2 terms, going public saying, actually, this is not the party to back. In fact, the way former President Jacob Zuma explains it, he says it's the ANC of Ramaphosa that is an issue with, right? So he comes out saying that he can't back it. The ANC's NEC, this is the highest decision-making body in between conferences in the ANC. So every 5 years they vote, but in between, they've got this body of men and women who make key decisions about the life and operations and how the functions really of the ANC and responds to issues externally, internally, and otherwise. So the NEC, between stumbling and struggling to figure out how to respond to this, eventually decides that it should charge the former president. And that's when the NDC comes into the picture. The NDC itself has gone back and forth about the proceedings themselves. Should there be a physical hearing, which is what former President Jacob Zuma wanted? Is it virtual? You obviously need to bring in witnesses to make representations of sorts. And in this back and forth, they eventually reach a conclusion, which came out this week. It was leaked before the NC confirmed it with Fikile Mbalula saying absolutely the NDC has found that the former president is guilty. What the former president was found guilty of course, is misconduct. The address that he made on the 16th of December goes against the ANC's constitution, which is actually quite clear. Around clause 25, I think there's a couple of sections, 17, but the clauses are quite clear. It's not confusing at all that if you go out and you campaign and you back another political party, that's not an alliance with the ANC, that's an act of misconduct. So he was found guilty of that, and the sanction, of course, from the NDC is that he should be expelled from the ANC. The leaked report is a really interesting read. It speaks about the charged person, of course, this being former President Jacob Zuma. It speaks about Tony Yengeni, who was his representative. Because remember, if you are charged in the ANC according to its own constitution, you must be represented by somebody who is a long-standing member, serving member, or a member in good standing, rather. That's the language they use. Tony Yengeni is the person that he had picked, and there's a back and forth where it's not the merit that Tony Yengeni was dealing with, but the conditions under which the hearing would take place. Former President Jacob Zuma had insisted for the longest time that it should be physical. He also actually wanted it in public, right? So for all of us, and I mean, obviously we would have wanted to see it, for all of us to see how it unfolds, it is an internal process. He was requesting what he knew he would not be given a chance to have happen. What was interesting for me is at some point it was meant to be physical just before the elections, and I thought it was silly. I thought the ANC had scored an own goal. Can you imagine in the lead up to the elections, at the height of campaigning, former President Jacob Zuma going to the Tuni House for a physical hearing? What would be happening outside? And they speak about that in the report as well, where the security concerns was a factor. The interesting thing for me is where the NDC believes that the former president cannot be rehabilitated. It speaks about the great determination he showed in trying to be an opponent, to be a candidate, to go to parliament, so he can be an opponent to the ANC in parliament. Remember, there were tons of court cases. He wanted to be a candidate. So they look at that. They speak about how he didn't care about the issue of security. There was no concern. They speak about how he wanted to put on a circus. I think those are the words of Fikile Mbalula. It's like a movie, he said, that the former president wanted to use. I mean, duh, obviously. It would have been an easy on-go, would have been an easy campaign. Can you imagine him standing outside Lutuli House denouncing the ANC of Ramaphosa? It would have worked. He would not have been the third largest party. He could have been the largest, if you ask me. So I do think that they recognized that a little bit too late. They were clumsy in their dealing. I'm now trying to also deal with the ANC's dealing with all of this, which I'll come back to in more detail a little bit later. Continuing with what we know as it stands, is that former President Jacob Zuma is consulting quite widely. I'm pretty sure with legal representatives as well, trying to figure out what the next step is. From the NC's perspective, he does have a window period. Once you're found guilty by the NDC, you have 21 days to go and appeal that outcome. So he's got that in the NC. I think the party is trying to see its constitution follow it to the latter. So he's got that. But I don't think that he'll go there. I've seen and I've listened to his foundation speaking in Mzwanele Mangi, that is. I've seen Tony Ngeni speaking, and all of them are kind of pointing to a need, a desire to continue fighting in some shape or form. I mean, somebody was being facetious, saying, oh, why don't you just go to the court route? So maybe, just maybe, the ANC will find itself wrangling with its former leader for many months to come still. I do know that this week they are in court again because they're still fighting over the symbolism and that name, Umkhonto Wesizwe. Going back to the ANC's handling, for me, I think the ANC was clumsy at the very beginning. To first say to journalists, we'll note this outcome, to then say we will not say anything, and then to go to all your public platforms. They were in the lead up to January 8th in Bombela and Mpumalanga. Then there's suddenly you speak about the thing that you said you're not going to speak about, and then suddenly you go back and forth, and then you then remember you have a constitution, and it's quite clear and it's easy to follow. It's a simple step, and this could be done quite swiftly, and only to then follow that path a little bit later on. I think it was incredibly clumsy. The ANC could have handled it better, and I also find it difficult. And I also find that they still have a difficult time answering why they handled it the way that they did. But I think who would have expected a former leader of an organization that they defended for so many years at such great lengths would do that to them? I think they're still reeling as a party from what the former president has done to them, from the impact, because the consequences of the elections 40% in part, largely actually, has to do with what former President Jacob Zuma has done. Heck, I don't even think some in the ANC realize it's lost power. So there's a lot of realities that the ANC still needs to make sense of. So I'm not surprised that when Fikile Mbalula, the Secretary General, is asked about the timing and whether it could have been handled better, he still is unable to give a thorough answer, a clear answer, as to why it was handled the way that it was. You can't blame them. He led for 2 terms. They've been in defense of this man well since before 2005. So I think to some degree, one is to go shame, I suppose. That's part of the struggle. What's been interesting for me are conversations with those in the party who seem to be pro-Zuma until the bitter end, and how they've made sense of this week's developments. And to be honest with you, I think they hardly blinked. I think the dramatic aspect of what's happened was in December. I think the difficulty in going, what, this really happened, was in May, in June, when the election results were coming out. I think what was done was done. A lot of people saying to me, what else could the NDC have done? What other possible conclusion could it have reached? It is quite clear that it's in breach of the Constitution. It is quite clear that it's impugned the integrity of the organization. And I know this is the part where everybody goes, oh, is this what it takes? Like you must insult the ANC in order for the ANC to act? Well, I'll leave it to you. I know that citizens complain about ANC leaders who've been protected for doing wrong things in society, in government, case in point, and then only when they go against the mighty ANC do they get dealt with. I mean, I'll leave that for you. But people who were at his side for the longest time are not even blinking. As I said, they've moved swiftly past this. Even those who are against Zuma saying, you're wasting our time even making it a big deal that he's been expelled. Let's swiftly move along. There are bigger issues in the country to worry about. There is a GNU government that has a lot of challenges on its hands. It's got to be able to address issues that everyday South Africans are grappling with. So what's interesting for me is the idea that people think it's dramatic. Of course, you must recognize the moment. It is unprecedented. This is the former president of the ANC who served 2 terms. I know somebody will make an argument that, oh, he's not the most senior, there wasn't Ace Makashvili. I don't think it's the same. I think even if you want to make an argument about the Africanists who left to form the PAC, I don't think it's the same. I think that we must recognize this moment for what it is. And you must recognize that these are leaders with egg on their faces, because the very same ANC of today is the same ANC that defended the former president for as long as it has, in the face of so much outcry about so many issues. And here they are today saying that they feel embarrassed, some of them, that they defended somebody who turned around and did not take them into his confidence about what he's doing. I must also quickly say, I spent time with the former president in Nkandla, and you know what? He also has strong feelings about this moment. He feels hard done by the ANC of Ramaphosa. He's very clear about where he stands. He said he'll be angry until he dies. That's what he told me. And you know what? I believe him. The question I kept asking him is, but is it worth it for all of us, this country, to go down because of how you feel about the ANC? And the answer was, I'll be angry until I die. And I firmly believe that. And then the other question that I think we do need to answer is it the final nail in the coffin? Everybody's been asking that. I'm like, oh, please, man. I think the final nail was put into the ANC's coffin a while ago. It's a question of whether or not it's the final hammer to the nail. And I don't think it's there yet. I think that the ANC knows where the ANC is. I don't think it can reverse the trajectory. I think they're going to have a lot of NEC meetings. They'll do a lot of diagnosis. They do that really, really well, but I don't think they have the will to reverse the path that they're on. Some of them are saying they must look at this as an opportunity to rebuild. How many opportunities have they had? Every opportunity the ANC has had has been an opportunity to rebuild. But as you rebuild, you leave more and more people disenfranchised. I remember speaking to the ANC Veterans League saying the sleepers must now come out. Those whose spirits are not with the ANC must also come out. I don't know if they will, because also we are in an era of careerism, right? Former President Thabo Mbeki, former president, founding president of our democracy, Dr. Nelson Mandela, these are leaders of the past who've spoken about careerism. I'm sure if you sit down with an ANC person, they'll speak about Ortambo and how some of the pitfalls he raised they're seeing today. So I'm not sure about that final nail conversation. What's also interesting to note is that those who are in defense of former President Jacob Zuma are skirting away from the issue of merit, and they're doing that for a reason. The other thing that's really, really confusing for many people is this fight for the ANC aspect of the former president. I think after spending so much time in a political party, it makes sense that you fight for the legacy you've built. Here's a person who's actually contributed, right, to brand ANC, to the liberation movement, to the liberation, the struggle rather, for the country's liberation. So I do think that a legacy often is well worth fighting for. But what I don't understand is why fight to remain in the ANC when you've got the MK, the third largest political party. You've got this baby that needs to be nurtured, that is struggling to find stability, that has shown itself to not have structures that are solid in place. I mean, look at the turnover as far as the MK party is concerned. You have an opportunity to actually see what you are calling your vision for this country through. Because clearly, some people believe in it. That's why you've managed to go past so many other political parties. Former President Jacob Zuma is not the only one who started a party. He was up against even Ace Makashules. Where is Ace Makashules? So your message resonates with somebody somewhere. So there is a baby that you could be spending time building. The question of where to from here remains to be seen, really. I did say to you earlier, he's apparently consulting, so let's see what that gives us. My thing, of course, from being around the former president is, I always say this, I hope that people who love him take care of him. And I think I'll leave it at that.